And just to advise you, 250 years after this country's founding, as a place where religion is varied and optional, the red, white, and blue Christian brand will be subsidized by the administration this week in a rally on the National Mall. This Sunday, we'll see it on full display. And I want to say to you, I'm provoked. Let me start by saying why, and then, of course, I want to turn our attention to what's happening in the U.S.-China meeting this week. I'm sure you'll have things to say. Rededicate 2026 is a celebration that will kick off for 9 hours on the National Mall this Sunday in Washington, D.C. It will be white Christian nationalism on parade, with government funding in some kind of a rather murky government public funding combination. Let me read you the invitation, Puilan, though I don't expect you'll be able to RSVP in the positive. Join with neighbors and friends from every state in the Union in giving thanks and praise to God for His providence in the United States, praying that God bless and protect America for the next 250 years. And in solemn rededication of our country as one nation under God. That's the invite, and it's called by the organizers a once-in-a-lifetime national moment. I would have to tell you as a scholar that the most verifiable statement here is that it is indeed a once-in-a-lifetime moment. Because historians of religion can't remember another such egregious example of how religion is shamelessly instrumentalized to reinforce a political agenda. Imagine with me if John F. Kennedy's administration had decided to rededicate the country to the Virgin Mary, crowning Mary, a statue of Mary on the steps of the Capitol, with flowers paid for by the government. You can't rededicate something that was never dedicated in the first place, and this country was never dedicated to God. Ironically, the Religious Liberties Commission had a meeting recently, and one of their members extraordinarily called for a federal hotline. I guess you could dial up and it would say, there is no separation between church and state. That was a serious proposal. Watch the Museum of the Bible, because that's the source of a lot of this stuff. The Green family of Hobby Lobby fame funded the Museum of the Bible now some years ago, and it is the seat of this kind of discussion in the United States. But let us remember, Puilan, that it was our colleague Diana Eck who debunked this notion of a Christian nation, this myth, in a remarkable set of research studies on how Americans believe. That was more than 25 years ago, in her landmark book, A New Religious America, how a Christian country has become the world's most religiously diverse nation. That's our real situation. Jews, Muslims, Hindus, and other faith groups make up our country in increasing numbers. More recently, since Diana was writing the first book, the nones, N-O-N-E-S, have been coming up quite alongside religious believers. Those are people who are affiliated with none of the above, with no religious tradition, by their own choice. And they now make up a quarter to a third of our population. And there are even more who call themselves, and I love the term, the never-agains. They're not religious, and they're not going to be religious again, and no thank you. So to produce a blatantly political rally with 14 of 15 announced speakers, almost all white evangelical Christians, is not only offensive, but I would think strategically stupid. Paying for it with tax dollars is dubious, if not illegal. Don't miss this, Kwok, father, son, ruler, king language that will be peppered throughout the discourse this weekend. The God involved is omnipotent, all-powerful, omniscient, knows everything, and omnipresent all over creation, just like those in power fancy themselves to be. Whatever happened to mercy, compassion, and love, which ground the divine that I understand? This is really why the religious right is so dangerous, because concepts like this undergird our political reality. What's happening with leaders of the U.S. and China as they meet in Beijing this week? Not only in relation to these kinds of questions, but into the larger global politic. Please pick it up, because I'm provoked.
Yes. Wow. It is important to recognize, Mary, Trump went to China during his first term as president. Now it is after almost 9 years for this second visit. And of course, this visit is very important for both United States and China. What would Trump want? Trump wants to push China to buy more products and also to talk about Iran, whereas President Xi wants to talk about Taiwan. Because China at this point does not have much to buy necessarily from the US. So, as you may know that, some people in China have been saying these 2 years really symbolized very clearly to the world that China is on the rise and America is on the decline. But let me just remind you, the two countries has built very symbiotic economic relations for well over 2 decades since China joined the WTO in 2001. So some have labeled this relationship as inter-imperial. How do you like the term? It's not just always enemy, but they are building empires together.
Very instructive, very instructive.
Yes. Let me also talk about the relationship between religion and the state in China. You know that I grew up with Confucian influence, but for a long time, Confucianism has been used as a state religion or a state ideology to help boost the monarchy and the power of the state. But I don't know whether you have heard, President Xi has pushed for Sinicization of religion, that is making Christianity, Buddhism, Islam more Chinese. So on the one side, you have the prayer meeting on the mall. On the other side, you have to make the church, the mosque, and also other religious sites more Chinese. Now, religion has played a big role in both countries to boost the state's power. Wouldn't you say so?
I agree. Yes, of course. But I'm learning from you about this situation in China, about which I do not know a lot, but I'm very intrigued. As we look at these questions, I think the issue is, what do our children and their children learn from what's going on? What do Jewish and Muslim and Hindu and Sikh and other children learn from this event on Sunday? What are they learning in China? Whose God are they talking about? Notice that some of the speakers at this upcoming meeting include Jonathan Falwell and Franklin Graham, who obviously learned their trade from their daddies. Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio will be jetting back from Beijing on our dime to parachute in to speak on the Mall at this pep rally for sexism, racism, imperialism, all in the name of the divine, a divine I don't recognize. Wow, what a consequential time we live in. Challenges abound, danger lurks. But Quilon, did you ever think when you started studying religion that it would be so central for how the world works? I didn't. But this season, it's hard to keep up with the fast and furious ways in which religion is used to reinforce, increasingly in the US at least, conservative powers. Would you say the same in China?
Well, I think that it is hard to say, because sometimes in China, religion has played the role as a form of resistance movements too. So you have different forms of peasants uprising in the name of whatever religion. Sometimes it's Taoism, sometimes it's Buddhism. So I think that it is more complicated because we do not have the religious power as you have in the history of Europe and also in the United States. That is, the church has been a very important institution in society. We do not have something like that in China. So that is different here. But talking about the use of Christianity, I have been thinking about how we are going to resist this kind of co-optation of Christianity. You have some good examples of how people are doing it?
I do. There are two, and they give me great hope. And I think at this stage of our global history, hope is really the coin of the realm. It's really what we need. And the two things that I see are, first of all, the real push in the UN, and I'm a believer in the UN, by peace-seeking women to revisit the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty with an eye toward holding the U.S. accountable and stopping the updating of those weapons of mass destruction, both here and in other countries that possess them. It's these women, especially the nuns, the Catholic sisters, who are pushing the question during this month-long review of the treaty in the United Nations to say that huge numbers of people have been destroyed, and through testing of late, much of our environment has been poisoned by nuclear testing. And it's women who've shown that and reiterate over and over again that it's not simply that, as the Pope said, happily and correctly, that Iraq should not have nuclear weapons, but these women say no one should have nuclear weapons, and therefore the review of the treaty should begin with the United States. I am completely with them on this nonviolent effort, and I think that they give me enormous hope. The other hope comes from, to me at least, from women like us. It's amazing to realize in our generation that it is older women who lead the way on many, many issues. We don't see ourselves as all-powerful, all-knowing, present everywhere, like that kind of fractured image of the divine that so many white Christian nationalists portray. Rather, we see ourselves, I think, as part of that mercy, justice, kindness crowd. Think of the grandmothers for gun responsibility who've seen enough death to know better. Think of the elders for climate action who want their grandchildren to live healthily. I love the raging grannies who sing parodies to shine light on injustice. And one of my favorites is a new one I just heard about, Grand Tifa, that is, grandmothers against fascism. As we make faithful provocations, I'm with that crowd, and I know you are too.
Yes, I also want to lift up the group that you organized, Mary, with Elizabeth Schleicher Ferenza decades ago, the Feminist Liberation Theologians Network. Because through that network, we have been hearing how women in different parts of the world, Australia, Germany, India, have been doing to resist empire and state authoritarianism. And another group that I want to name is this group of women from the Global South. I have been meeting with a group also trying to understand their vision about a new society, especially the younger ones. They are very tired of this old politics and patriarchy, and they want to rebel and try to find new ways, because they are now very good at using the social media, and they are organizing through WhatsApps and other new social medium.
Well, thank you for mentioning the Feminist Liberation Theologians Network. It is, in fact, a remarkable more than 30-year project of bringing together people with the kind of training that we have in feminist issues, post-colonial issues, anti-racism issues in religion. And you'll be happy to know that the people who did the IT for the most recent meeting, one was in Germany and one was in Ireland, and their average age, the two of them, was 21. So we really do have our future in good hands, and we're doing our part.
Will you be going down to the mall this weekend?
I think I have to wash my hair on Sunday, so I will probably not be available for that. I haven't been invited to speak, but I would have to tell you so that you know that, Pete Hegseth will be there with his hair gel, and Marco Rubio will be there, and they'll be using their positions to reinforce and reinscribe this white Christian nationalist approach. And I think that we must do everything in our power to show, especially from a feminist post-colonial perspective, how absolutely wrong it is in terms of its understanding of Christianity, and particularly how egregious it is in terms of not respecting the separation of church and state, which is part of our nation's history.
Thank you very much for joining the episode today. Faithful Provocations will stand by, and we will begin another series when we have something to comment on the news event.